The south wall, the east wall, the west wall measured correctly. The east wall was shorter than the drawing indicated by 1.2 meters. Bridger stood in front of the east wall with his tape measure and his flashlight and the architectural drawing, and he checked the numbers 3 times because the first 2 times he assumed he had made an error. He had not made an error. The east wall was 1.2 meters shorter than it should have been, which meant that behind it, in the space between the existing wall and where the actual exterior foundation was, there was a void. A space that did not appear on any drawing because it had not existed when the drawing was made. It had been created afterward, and whoever had created it had used limestone block and mortar from the same period as the original construction and had done the work with a quality of care that had hidden it completely for over 70 years. This was not an accident. This was not a structural modification. It was dry in a way that the rest of the basement was not, which meant that whoever had built this enclosure had also addressed drainage and ventilation. Small details that spoke to the thoroughness of the planning. It smelled of old air and old paper, and suddenly something metallic, the smell of a space that had been sealed and had been keeping its contents with the patient faithfulness of something that was built for exactly this purpose. On the floor of the void, centered with the care of placement rather than the casualness of concealment, sat a metal box. Bridger crouched and looked at it for a moment before touching it. It was approximately the size of a large briefcase made of steel, with a surface that showed the specific pattern of oxidation that comes from many decades, but not corrosion, the oxidation of protected metal rather than exposed metal. Along the seam of the lid, the faint traces of a welding bead were visible. The box had been sealed, not locked, welded shut. He cut the weld carefully, working around the perimeter of the lid with the patience of someone who understands that what is inside matters more than the time it takes to reach it. When the weld was cut, he set down the grinder and used his hands to lift the lid. Inside, wrapped in heavy oilcloth that had preserved them through 7 decades of temperature change and moisture variation, were 3 categories of contents. The first was money, not a small amount. Stacks of bills from the 1940s and early 1950s, the specific denominations of an era when people kept cash because cash was what they trusted. The bills were intact, the oilcloth having done its job completely. He did not count it then, but he looked at it long enough to understand that this was a significant sum by any standard. The second was photographs, black and white, printed on the heavy paper stock of the era, showing a family. A man in his 40s, broad-shouldered, with the look of someone accustomed to physical work. A woman beside him with a directness in her expression that came through even in the formal stillness of a posed photograph. And a child, a girl of perhaps 7 or 8, standing slightly in front of both parents with the unself-consciousness of a child who has not yet learned to perform for a camera. They were standing on the porch of the house, the porch that was now in partial collapse, the porch that had once been the kind of porch that said something about the family behind it. The third was letters. 23 of them from the count he made without opening them, bundled together with a strip of cloth that had once been a specific color and was now simply faded. Each letter had been folded and placed in an envelope, and the envelopes had been stacked and tied and then wrapped in the oilcloth with the money and the photographs. Bridger sat down. He thought about the particular feeling he'd had in the motel room in Lexington when the listing had appeared on the screen and something below language had said there, and he thought about how he had explained that feeling to himself afterward as practical calculation, good value, structural potential, and how none of those explanations had ever quite accounted for the certainty of it. He picked up the first letter. The envelope had his name on it, not his name, not Bridger Holt, no name at all. What was written on the front of the envelope, in the careful, deliberate hand of a man who had learned penmanship in an era when penmanship was considered a reflection of character, was a single line. It said, "To whoever opens this, I have been waiting for you." Bridger held the letter in the cold light of the study with the wood fire going in the fireplace and the wind pushing against the intact windows and Sable breathing steadily at his feet, and the house was quiet around him in the way that it had been quiet since he arrived, that specific quality of stillness that was not emptiness but patience. He opened the letter. The paper was thin but intact, the ink faded to a soft brown but fully legible, the handwriting the same careful, deliberate script as the envelope. He read slowly the way he read anything that mattered. It said, My name is Everett Goss. I built this house in 1923, and I am leaving it in 1951, and I will not be coming back. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it because it is true, and because the person reading this deserves to know the truth of what they have found. This box contains what I could not carry and could not leave to chance. The money is for my daughter, Winifred. The letters explain why I could not give it to her myself. If you are a person of honest character, you will understand what I am asking. If you are not, then nothing I write here will change that, and I have simply miscalculated. But I do not think I have miscalculated. The kind of person who finds something hidden this deep in a place this forgotten is not the kind of person who came here looking for what he could take. He came here because he needed what this place could give him. And what this place can give is the chance to do something that matters. I am asking you to find my daughter. Her name is Winifred Goss. As of November 1951, she is 9 years old. If God has been kinder than I deserve, she is still alive when you read this. Everything in this box belongs to her. Bridger set the letter down on the table. He looked at the fire. He sat for a long time in the chair in the cold study of the house that had been waiting for 73 years with the box open in front of him and the contents of a life arranged inside it and the weight of what he had just read settling into him with the specific gravity of something that had found the right level and was not going to move. Outside, the winter dark had come fully down over Caulfield, and the stars were hard and clear in the frozen sky, and the house was quiet around him. Sable raised his head and looked at Bridger with those amber eyes. Bridger looked back. He did not know what he was going to do yet. He understood that was not quite true. He knew. He had known from the moment he read the words, "I do not think I have miscalculated," because those words had done what very few things in the past 2 years had managed to do, which was to make him feel accurately seen. He picked up the second letter and began to read. He read all 23 letters over the course of 2 nights. Not because the reading was slow. Bridger read quickly and with the complete attention he brought to anything that mattered, the kind of attention that does not allow for distraction because the distraction has simply been set aside, not absent, but held in suspension, while the primary thing gets what it requires. He read quickly and he read carefully and he stopped frequently. Not because he was confused by what he was reading, but because certain things require time between them, a pause in which the information can settle before the next layer is added, the way you allow fresh concrete to cure before loading it. Everett Goss had been a precise writer, not literary, not the writing of a man who has read widely or thought of himself as someone with a gift for words, but precise in the way that certain practical men are precise the way a man is precise when he has learned that imprecision costs things he cannot afford to lose. Every letter was dated. Every event described was located in time and place. The people involved were named fully the first time they appeared and consistently thereafter. The sequence of events was rendered in the order in which they occurred without the retrospective reordering that memory tends to impose on things it has had time to process. The story Bridger assembled from the 23 letters was this. Everett Goss had owned land, 340 acres of eastern Kentucky hill country that had been in the family since his grandfather's generation land that contained timber and creek bottoms and a seam of high-quality coal running through the eastern ridge that Everett had known about and had chosen deliberately not to develop. The coal was his. The choice of what to do with it was his. He had looked at what coal development had done to other parts of eastern Kentucky, and he had decided that what it had done was not what he wanted for his land, or for Caulfield, or for the people who lived in it. In 1948, a company called Meridian Extraction had begun buying land in the county. They moved methodically, starting with the most willing sellers, building a contiguous block of acreage that grew until the Goss land sat in the middle of it like a space in a puzzle. The value of Meridian's holdings depended substantially on access across the Goss property to reach the processing infrastructure they were building on the county road. Without that access, the economics of their operation were difficult. With it, they were very good. Everett had said no 3 times over the course of 2 years. The fourth approach had come not from the company's landmen, but from 2 men who had arrived at the house in the evening, spoken to Everett on the porch while his wife and daughter were inside, and what they had said had moved the conversation from the category of negotiation to the category of threat. He had written about this in the 7th letter with the same precision he applied to everything else, the specific words they had used, and the specific names they had given, which Bridger noted without knowing yet what he would do with them. By the fall of 1951, the pressure had become something that Everett understood as beyond his capacity to resist indefinitely. He had contacted a lawyer in Lexington who had told him that the legal options were limited and expensive and slow. He had spoken to the county sheriff who had told him that he understood Everett's position and that he would look into it, which Everett translated correctly as a statement that the sheriff understood whose side it was advisable to be on, and it was not Everett's. In November of 1951, a fire had started in the barn. It had not spread to the house, but it had not been an accident, and Everett knew it had not been an accident. And the fire marshal's report, which Everett quoted briefly in the 10th letter, had described the cause as undetermined. 3 days after the fire, Everett had made his decision. He had spent the following week in the basement of the house building the concealed space and preparing the box. He had converted every liquid asset he could access without triggering attention into cash, the specific denominations of the era, and he had organized it and wrapped it and placed it with the photographs and the letters he had written, one per day during the same week, letters to Winifred, that covered the things he wanted her to know and might not have the opportunity to tell her another way. On the 14th of November 1951, he had loaded his wife and his daughter and what they could carry into the truck and driven away from Caulfield without telling anyone where they were going. He had not told Winifred about the box. She was 9 years old. Children tell things not from dishonesty, but from the nature of childhood, and what she did not know she could not share. He had told her only that he had made arrangements for her future. She had been 9. She had not known what that meant. By the 23rd letter, written on the day before they left, Everett had said the thing he had been building toward across all the previous letters. He had addressed it not to Winifred, but to whoever would open the box, and he had said it plainly. He wrote, "I have done what I can do from where I stand. The rest requires someone I have not met. I am asking that person to find my daughter and give her what I set aside for her. I am asking them to do this not because they owe me anything or because I can offer them anything in return, but because it is right. I have tried to build things in my life that were right. The house, the land, the family I raised in it. I did not get to finish the building. I am asking a stranger to carry the last piece to where it belongs. I do not know who you are, but I know why you are here. You are here because this place called to you the way it called to me because you needed what it could give, which is the particular piece of a place that asks nothing except that you respect what it is. I hope you found what you came for, and I hope you will do one more thing before you settle into it." Bridger read this last section on the second night, sitting in the same chair by the same fire, and he sat with it for a long time after he set the letter down. Sable was lying at his feet. The fire was lower now, reduced to the kind of heat that is felt more than seen the coals doing their patient final work. Bridger was not a man who spoke to empty rooms as a general rule, but he said quietly to the house or to the memory it contained or to no one in particular, "I hear you." He slept better that night than he had in 2 years. In the morning, he began trying to find Winifred Goss. He started with the county records office in Caulfield, which opened at 8 and was staffed by a woman of approximately 60 who looked at Bridger with the specific assessment of a small-town records clerk who has seen people come in looking for things they should not necessarily be able to find and who calibrates her helpfulness accordingly. He explained that he had purchased the Goss property and was trying to locate surviving family members in connection with items found on the premises. He kept the explanation brief and accurate and entirely incomplete, which was the correct approach. She helped him to the extent of the available records, which showed that Everett Goss had transferred the property deed to Meridian Extraction in February of 1952, 3 months after leaving, which Bridger interpreted correctly as the company having used the leverage of the outstanding land dispute to force a sale at some point after Everett's departure. Beyond that, the trail ended at 1951. No forwarding address, no subsequent records of an Everett or Clara or Winifred Goss in the county system. He tried the state records database from his laptop that evening, running the name through the available birth and death records, marriage records, property records. There were 12 women named Winifred Goss in the state records across the relevant time period, of which 3 were the right approximate age. He spent the following day tracking down information on all 3. 2 were confirmed deceased. The third had a last known address in Ohio in a suburb of Columbus, and Bridger drove there over 2 days, making the round trip in one long push that left him stiff and tired, and at the end of it, certain he had found the wrong person. The woman in Ohio was the right age but the wrong history entirely, a Winifred Goss born in Ohio to Ohio parents with no connection to Kentucky. He drove back to Caulfield and sat in the study with the box and the letters and the photographs and the particular feeling of a search that has produced only the shape of the thing it is looking for, not the thing itself. That was the evening of the fourth day of searching. On the fifth day, a car he did not recognize pulled up in front of the house and a man got out and came to the door. His name was Purcell. He gave only the surname, which was itself a specific choice. The choice of someone who understands that a surname alone creates a certain distance that a first name would close. He was approximately 50, in a coat that was too good for Caulfield in December, and shoes that had not been purchased with the expectation of gravel drives. He carried a leather briefcase, and he had the specific manner of a man who has spent his career delivering news that other people find inconvenient. He explained, a corporate entity called Meridian Holdings, which was the current successor organization to Meridian Extraction, the company that had acquired the Goss property in 1952. Meridian Holdings had a continuing legal interest in the Goss estate that derived from that original acquisition, specifically a clause in the 1952 transfer agreement that extended certain rights to any assets discovered on the property within the original boundaries, assets that had been part of the estate at the time of the original transfer and had not been declared in the conveyance. Bridger let him talk without interrupting. When Purcell finished, Bridger said, "You want the contents of the box." Purcell said the company was aware that items had been discovered on the premises, which told Bridger something about the reach of information in a small county and the number of people who might have seen him carry a metal box out of the house. Purcell said the company was prepared to be reasonable. The clause in the 1952 agreement was he acknowledged of uncertain legal force in the current environment. But litigation was expensive and slow, and the company had resources to sustain it where individuals typically did not. He offered a division of the discovered assets, 50% to Bridger, 50% to Meridian Holdings. All Bridger needed to do was make a declaration to the county that the items had been found and turn over half. Bridger looked at him for a long moment. He said, "How long do I have?" Purcell said the company would need his decision within 72 hours, after which they would file for a court order requiring inspection of the premises and any items found thereon. He left. Bridger stood at the window of the study and watched the car go back down the gravel drive and through the gates and onto the county road and disappear. Sable was beside him. Bridger said nothing for a while. Then he went to the table and picked up the 19th letter and read the specific passage again, the one he had read 3 times already. Everett had written, "The kind of person who finds something hidden this deep in a place this forgotten is not the kind of person who came here looking for what he could take." Bridger set the letter down. The money in the box was significant. He had counted it on the second morning, the old bills in their stacks, and the total in face value was $42,000, which in 1951 denominations represented a substantial portion of what a man could accumulate in a lifetime of careful work. The collector value of bills in this condition from this era was potentially higher. He did not know exactly. He had not looked it up because looking it up would have meant entertaining the question of keeping it, and he had not been entertaining that question. He had not been entertaining it from the moment he read the first letter. But he had also not found Winifred Goss, and now he had 72 hours. He sat down at the table and looked at the box and at the photographs and at the stack of 23 letters and at the problem in front of him, which was the problem of finding a woman who was 82 years old and had been functionally invisible for 73 years in 72 hours without the kind of institutional access that would have made the search straightforward if he had still been the kind of person who had institutional access. He was no longer that person. But he had Sable, and he had the contents of the box, and he had the specific quality of attention that 16 years of solving problems in conditions that did not accommodate failure had built into him at a level below conscious strategy. He began again. This time he started not with names but with events. The fire in November 1951. He searched newspaper archives from the regional papers of the era, which were available in digitized form, through a university library database he accessed online. He found a brief item in the county paper from November 1951 describing a barn fire at a property on the eastern county line, cause undetermined. The property was described, but the family name was not given. This was consistent with the politics Everett had described. He searched for Meridian Extraction in the same archives and found more. The company had been active in the regional news from 1948 through the early 1960s, and the coverage told a story that aligned precisely with what Everett had written. He found the name of the company's principal officer, a man named Vance Tulloch, and he found subsequent records showing that Meridian had eventually been acquired by a larger entity and that Tulloch had retired to Florida in 1974 and died there in 1989. He found the 1952 property transfer. In the county deed records, a single document recording the sale of the Goss land to Meridian Extraction for a price that was substantially below any reasonable market value, which was consistent with a transaction conducted under duress. But none of this told him where Winifred Goss was. He was at the table with the laptop and the physical records and the letters spread in front of him, working through the third day of searching when Sable moved. The dog had been lying under the table in his customary position. He stood up with the specific deliberateness of a dog that has decided something requires attention and moved to the table and stood looking at the box. Bridger looked at him. Sable put his nose close to the metal surface of the box and worked along the bottom edge the way he worked when he was tracking something specific, and then he pushed at the base of the box with his muzzle. Bridger watched for a moment and then reached forward and lifted the box and turned it over. Along the bottom edge of the box where the base plate met the sides, there was a seam, distinct from the welded seam of the lid, a different kind of joint mechanical, rather than welded a plate that had been fitted into the base with screws that had been set flush and painted over in the same oxidized finish as the rest of the exterior. Bridger got a screwdriver. He worked the 4 screws out of the base plate and lifted it away. In the cavity between the base plate and the floor of the box, thin enough to fit within the depth of the base plate's recess, was a single envelope. He looked at it for a moment. Then he took it out. The envelope was different from the others. Not the same paper, not the same ink, not the same hand. The paper was newer. Not new by any absolute measure, but newer by several decades than the letters inside the box. The ink was darker, less faded, the writing of a pen that had been used within the past 40 years rather than 70. The handwriting was different too. Smaller, more rounded. The handwriting of a woman he thought, though he acknowledged to himself that this was an inference. He opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper and a small photograph. The photograph showed the front of the house taken from the drive in what appeared to be summer. The overgrowth visible in the photograph was consistent with a date perhaps 35 years ago, the vegetation less mature than it was now, but already well established, the house already showing the early stages of the deterioration that had continued since. In the lower right corner of the photograph, written in the same hand as the envelope, was a date, August 1989. Someone had been here in August of 1989. He unfolded the sheet of paper. It was a letter, short, 4 paragraphs, none of them long. It said, "I came back. I do not know why I believed I could find what my father told me was here. I looked for 2 hours and found nothing, and I am leaving now before I lose what remains of the hope that carried me this far. I am not leaving empty-handed entirely. I am leaving this. If you are the person who found my father's box, then you are the person I cannot find, and I need you to find me instead. My name is Clara Margaret Goss, and I am Everett's wife, and Winifred is my daughter, and she is alive, and she is well, and she is living at the address I am writing below. Please, whatever Everett left, please get it to her. It was meant for her. It has always been meant for her." Below the letter was an address, Knoxville, Tennessee, a street and a number written in the same careful hand. Bridger sat with the letter in his hands and the photograph on the table in front of him, and the specific understanding of what had just happened moving through him with the quality of something that has been in motion for a very long time and has finally arrived. Clara Goss had come back to the house in August of 1989. She had come looking for what her husband had hidden, and she had not found it because she had not known about the false wall, and the concealed space had not had the blueprint in the tape measure and in the 16 years of training that had taught Bridger to notice when dimensions do not match drawings. She had come and looked and left, and she had been smart enough and determined enough to leave something behind. She had put the envelope in the base of the box, but the box had been inside the wall. Bridger stopped. He thought about this carefully. If the box had been inside the concealed space behind the false wall, Clara could not have put anything inside it in 1989. She had not found the box. She had said so explicitly. She had looked for 2 hours and found nothing. He looked at the base plate he had removed from the box. He looked at the screws he had set aside on the table. He looked at the cavity they had revealed. The screws showed oxidation consistent with the rest of the box. But the paint over them was different. Slightly different in texture. Slightly different in the specific tone of the oxidized finish. Someone had opened the base of this box after it was originally sealed, had added the envelope, had resealed the base and painted over the screws to match the existing finish as closely as possible. Not Clara, who had not found the box, but someone who had found the box after 1989, read the letters inside, and then found Clara somehow and received from her the envelope with the address and come back to the box and added it to what was inside. Someone who had found the box and understood what it was and what it required and had added to it the thing it needed most, which was the address of the person it was meant for, and had then resealed it and put it back in the concealed space. Someone who had decided, for reasons Bridger could only speculate about, not to complete the task themselves. Someone who had decided that this task was meant for someone else. He sat with this understanding for a long time. Then he looked at the address in Knoxville. Then he looked at the clock. It was 9 in the evening. He had been sitting with the letters and the records and the searches for hours. The deadline Purcell had given him was 72 hours from the previous afternoon, which meant he had approximately 31 hours remaining. Knoxville was 3 hours from Caulfield. He could drive it in one night. He folded Clara's letter and placed it carefully with the others. He put the photograph in the inside pocket of his jacket. He lifted the base plate and checked that the cavity was empty and set the base plate back in place and replaced the 3 screws he was able to replace without the 4th, which he had stripped getting out. He closed the lid of the box. He carried it to the truck and set it on the passenger seat. He got Sable from the house and settled the dog in the back and went through the house, turning off the generator and banking the fire in the fireplace, and closing and securing the windows he had been leaving cracked for ventilation. He came back to the truck and sat in it for a moment in the dark of the December night, with the frozen gravel of the drive visible in the headlights and the house behind him in the rearview mirror, the shape of it against the stars. He thought about Everett Goss building that wall in November of 1951, preparing the box, writing the letters, placing everything in the void behind the limestone, and sealing it in with the knowledge that he would not be coming back and the hope that whoever eventually came would be the right person. He thought about Clara coming back in 1989 and not finding what she came for, but leaving something anyway, the address on the paper, the specific act of not giving up that leaves something behind when it cannot complete the thing it came to do. He thought about whoever had come between 1989 and now found the box, understood what it was, added the envelope and put it back. 3 people across 70 years, none of them completing the task, each of them adding what they could add and leaving the rest for someone they would never meet. He started the truck. Sable shifted in the back and settled. The headlights swept across the face of the house as Bridger turned in the drive, and for a moment the windows caught the light and gave it back, and the house did not look abandoned or sad or tired. It looked like it was watching him go, like it knew he was coming back. He drove out through the gates and turned onto the county road toward the interstate and pointed the truck south toward Knoxville with 29 hours left, and one address and the boson, the seat beside him, and the specific clarity of a man who has finally found the thing he came somewhere to do. He drove through the night with the heater running and the radio off. There was nothing he wanted from the radio. No news, no music, no voice filling the cab with content that would require the part of his mind he needed for other things. The road was sufficient. The dark outside the headlights was sufficient. The sound of Sable breathing in the back was sufficient. These 3 things together created the particular quality of attention that Bridger had learned over 16 years of work that required it to inhabit without effort the state in which the immediate demands of the physical world were handled automatically, while the deeper processing continued below. He was thinking about the envelope, not Clara's letter which he had read and understood. He was thinking about the mechanism of it, the base plate, The screws painted over with a finish that matched the box, but was not quite the same texture as the original oxidation. Someone had opened the base of that box after 1989 and added what Clara had not been able to add herself because she had not found the box, which meant someone had found the box, read the contents, understood what it required somehow, found Clara, received the address from her, come back to the house, opened the base plate, placed the envelope, and resealed everything, and then left, had not completed the task, had left the box in the wall with the new addition inside it, and gone away, and let whatever came next come next. He had turned this over many times during the drive, and he kept arriving at the same place. Whoever had done this had understood something about the task that was not in the letters, had understood that completing it themselves would not be the right completion, that the task was not merely to deliver the box to Winifred, but to deliver it in a specific way by a specific kind of person at a specific kind of moment, that the delivery was part of the meaning, and the meaning required the right deliverer. He did not know who that person was. He was not sure it mattered now. What mattered was that 3 hours south of Caulfield, in a city he had passed through once years ago, and barely remembered, a woman of 82 was in a facility that had listed her in its records as having no family and no assets, which was two of the most isolating things a record could say about a living person. And she did not know that someone had been keeping something for her for 73 years. He reached Knoxville at midnight. The address Clara had written was not the address of the care facility. He discovered this by navigating to it and finding a residential street in a neighborhood that had changed significantly since 1989. The houses smaller and closer together than the street might once have been, the kind of neighborhood that absorbs decades without dramatic alteration, but accumulates small changes until the aggregate is significant. The specific address was a house with lights on in one window, occupied, no connection to Winifred that he could establish at midnight on a Tuesday in December. He sat in the truck outside the house for a few minutes. Clara had written down Winifred's address in 1989. It was now 2024, 35 years. People moved. People moved many times in 35 years. And the specific reason a person might move from a private residence to a care facility in that span of time was not difficult to deduce. He spent 20 minutes on his phone finding care facilities in the Knoxville area, cross-referencing the name Winifred Goss against the ones that had online directories or staff listing pages. Most did not. Care facilities maintain their residents' information with appropriate privacy, which is correct and appropriate, and was in this specific moment an obstacle. He found her on the fourth facilities page, not in the resident directory, which was not public, but in a photograph from a community event 2 years prior that had been posted to the facility's social media page with a caption that named several residents. One of the names was Winifred G. The facility was called Meadowbrook Care and Rehabilitation. It was 12 minutes from where he was parked. He drove there and sat in the parking lot and looked at the building. It was what care facilities are: functional and clean in its exterior presentation, designed to communicate competence and stability rather than warmth. The architecture of a place that knows its primary audience is families making difficult decisions and wants to appear as the right decision. The lights inside were the reduced lighting of nighttime operation, the kind of light that says the building is maintained and attended, but not at full activity. He could not go in at midnight. He reclined the seat and slept. Sable slept across the back seat. The night passed. At 7 in the morning, the facility's parking lot began filling with the first shift arrivals, and at 7:45, Bridger went inside. The reception desk was staffed by a young woman who looked at him with a professional assessment of someone trained to evaluate visitors before they reach the people in their care. He was aware of what she was seeing: a man in his early 40s, neither disheveled nor polished, wearing the kind of clothes that come from a person who buys for function, carrying a metal box that did not obviously belong in a care facility lobby. He said he was here to see Winifred Goss, that he was not a family member, but that he had something that belonged to her family and needed to reach her directly. He said it plainly and without embellishment, which was how he said everything that required credibility. The woman said she would need to check with the duty manager. The duty manager was a man in his 50s who came out from the back with the specific manner of someone who has had enough experience with unexpected visitors to have developed a protocol for them. He asked Bridger several questions. How did he know Winifred Goss? What was the nature of the items he said belonged to her? Was there family he could contact to verify? Bridger said her file shows no family. That is part of why I am here. He said I purchased a property in Caulfield, Kentucky that belonged to her father. I found items inside the property that he left specifically for her in 1951. I have driven here from Caulfield to return them to her. The duty manager looked at the box. He said, what kind of items? Bridger said letters from her father, photographs of her family, and something her father set aside to provide for her future. The manager looked at him for another moment. Then he said, give me a few minutes. He went back through the door. Bridger sat in one of the chairs in the lobby. He set the box on the floor beside the chair and rested his hands on his knees and waited with the patience of someone who has learned that waiting is simply another form of work, that it requires the same quality of presence as action and produces different but equally necessary results. Sable was in the truck. He had cracked the windows, and the morning was cold enough that the truck would stay at a safe temperature, and Sable had settled into the back seat with the equanimity of a dog who has spent years being asked to wait in vehicles and has arrived at a philosophical accommodation with the requirement. After 11 minutes, the duty manager returned and said that Winifred was awake and had agreed to a visit. He walked Bridger down a corridor that smelled of institutional breakfast and floor cleaner and the particular quality of air that exists in places where people are at the end of things rather than the middle of them, the air of rooms where the future has been contracted to a smaller set of possibilities. The room at the end of the corridor was private, which surprised Bridger briefly. The facility had listed her as having no assets, but a private room cost more than a shared one. Then he understood. Some things the state provides. Some things the facility absorbs. Some things are arranged in ways that are not visible in records. He knocked on the open door. She was sitting in a chair near the window. Winifred Goss was 82 years old, and she looked it in the way that certain people look their age, not as a diminishment, but as an accumulation. Her hair was white and worn short, and her hands rested in her lap with the particular stillness of hands that have done their work and come to rest. Her eyes were the thing that arrested him. They were the same eyes as the child in the black and white photograph, the 9-year-old standing on the porch in the Kentucky summer, with the unself-consciousness of a child who does not know she is about to lose the world she is standing in. Dark and direct, and carrying within them the long history of a person who has looked at a great many things and has learned to look at all of them honestly. She looked at Bridger. She looked at the box in his hand. She said nothing. He came into the room and moved the chair from the desk to a position across from hers and sat down, and he set the box on the floor between them. He said, my name is Bridger Holt. I bought the house in Caulfield 6 weeks ago. I found this inside the wall of the basement. She was looking at the box. He said your father built a concealed space behind the east wall of the basement and put this inside it before your family left in November of 1951. He wanted you to have it. Everything in it is yours. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, he told me. Bridger said, I know. I read the letters. She looked up at him, then from the box to his face. And the look contained something that he needed a moment to identify. Something that was not quite surprise and not quite recognition, but was in the territory between them. The look of a person encountering a face that answers a question they have been sitting with for a very long time. She said he told me the night we left. He said he had made arrangements. He said I would be taken care of. He said it the way he said things when he meant them absolutely. She paused. She said I was 9. I did not understand what he meant. I knew it was important because of how he said it. I kept it with me the way children keep things that seem important, the way you hold something carefully because you understand it has value even before you understand why. She stopped again. She said, and then the years passed. And I tried to go back twice and I could not get in, and I stopped believing it was real. I decided it was what a father tells a frightened child in the dark. Something to hold on to. Not a real thing. She looked back at the box. She said my mother went back in 1989. Did you know that? He said yes. She left something inside the box. She looked at him. He said there is a letter from her inside, and her photograph of the house. The thing that moved across Winifred's face then was not something he could fully read, because it was too large and too specific to the interior of her particular life. The lifetime of carrying something between belief and the slow erosion of belief and the arrival of confirmation. when confirmation was no longer expected. It was the expression of a person whose suspended faith has been retroactively validated, which is not the same as joy and is not the same as grief, but borrows from both. He reached down and opened the lid of the box. He lifted out the photographs first and held them toward her. She took them with both hands. She looked at the first one for a long time without speaking. He did not speak either. He understood that this was not a silence to be filled. She was looking at her parents standing on the porch of the house, her father broad-shouldered and direct, her mother with the same dark eyes that were looking at the photograph now from 82 years of additional distance. Then she found the one with the child, the 9-year-old on the porch standing in the Kentucky summer unaware. Her hands were not entirely steady. She held the photograph and said nothing, and Bridger sat across from her and gave her the time that it required, which was considerable, and which he gave without reservation. After a while, she set the photographs carefully on her lap and looked at the box. He reached in and lifted out the bundle of 23 letters, still tied with a cloth strip, and held them toward her. She took them with the same careful hands. She looked at the handwriting on the outside of the first envelope for a long moment. She touched it with one finger. The specific touch of a person identifying something through more than one sense, confirming through touch what the eye has already told them. But that is too significant to confirm with the eye alone. She said his handwriting. He said yes. 23 letters. One for each day he spent preparing before you left. She looked at him. He said he wrote one each day while he was building the wall and preparing the box. So you would know the full story. So you would understand what happened and why. He wanted you to have the explanation he did not have time to give you in person. She held the bundle of letters against her chest for a moment, both arms across them, the way you hold something that you are not yet ready to open, but need to confirm the physical reality of. Then she looked at the box again. He reached in and lifted out the stacks of bills, still in their oilcloth wrapping, and set them on the floor beside the box. She looked at them. He said he converted everything he could access into cash before you left. He wanted you to have a future, even if he could not give you the one he had planned. She looked at the money for a long moment, and then she looked away from it out the window at the gray December morning, and he understood that the money was not the thing that mattered to her, that it had perhaps never been the thing that mattered, that what had mattered for 73 years was the other thing, the thing that the money was only the material expression of. He said there is something else. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out Clara's letter, the one from the base of the box, and the small photograph of the house in the August summer of 1989. He held them toward her. She looked at the photograph first. She said she went back. He said in August of 1989. She looked for 2 hours. She did not find the box because she did not know about the wall, but she left the letter before she went. Winifred opened the letter with hands that required deliberate steadiness and read it. He did not watch her read it. He looked at the window at the gray morning at the parking lot below where his truck was parked with Sable inside, and he gave her the privacy of reading her mother's words for the first time. After a while, she said she could not find it. He said no. She said she left the address. He said yes. She said she left it in the box she could not find. He said someone found the box after your mother left. Read the letters. Found your mother somehow. Got the address from her. Came back and put the letter inside the base of the box and sealed it back up. She looked at him. He said, I do not know who that was. There was no other letter, no name, just the address added to what was already there. Whoever it was decided the task was not theirs to complete. She considered this for a long moment. She said they decided to wait for the right person. He said, that is what I think. She looked at him steadily with those dark eyes that had been looking at things honestly for 82 years. She said, and you are the right person. He did not answer that directly because it was not the kind of statement that benefited from direct answer. It was the kind that was more honestly received than responded to. He said instead, your father wrote something in the 19th letter. He said the person who found the box would be someone who came to the house because they needed what the house could give, because they understood what it was to be a place that the world had left behind. She said, and did you need what the house could give? He said, yes. She said, and did you find it? He thought about this honestly before answering. He said, I found part of it before I found the box. The house gave me the quiet I needed, and then the box gave me the reason I needed. I think those might have been two halves of the same thing. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "My father was a very deliberate man." He said, "I know, I could tell from the letters." She said he did not do things accidentally. When he said he had made arrangements, he meant more than the money. He always meant more than the obvious thing. Bridger considered this. She said he knew the house would find the right person. He built it to last, and he trusted it to do the rest. He trusted that a house that had been waiting long enough would eventually be found by someone who was also waiting, who needed what a long waiting thing can offer. Bridger did not respond to this, but he sat with it. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out the document he had carried there since leaving Caulfield that morning. He had printed it at the Motel Business Center before driving to the facility. It was the legal summary his phone search had produced, confirming that a surviving heir presenting valid family documentation could file a competing claim against any corporate assertion of rights to discovered assets within the original property boundaries, and that such a claim filed within the relevant period would take precedence over a corporate claim. He set it on the floor beside the box. He said there is a company called Meridian Holdings. They are the successor to the company that took your father's land in 1952. They have claimed an interest in the contents of the box. They gave me a deadline of 72 hours to respond to their demand. That deadline ends in approximately 4 hours. She looked at the document. He said, if you can provide documentation that you are Everett Goss's daughter, a birth certificate, or any other formal record, you have a stronger legal claim than they do, and their demand has no standing. The process requires filing with the county, which I can do on your behalf if you authorize me to do so. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, my birth certificate has been in that drawer for 20 years. She indicated the nightstand beside the bed. My mother kept her documents and mine together. They came to me when she passed in 2003. I never had reason to do anything with them. She said the nightstand. Top drawer. He crossed to the nightstand and opened the top drawer, and inside, beneath a Bible and a small photograph, in a frame that he did not look at closely, was a manila envelope, old but intact, with a rubber band around it that had dried and cracked but still held. He brought it to her. She opened it and looked through the contents with the practiced familiarity of someone who has handled these documents enough times to know exactly what is there. She extracted a single document and held it toward him. Kentucky Certificate of Birth, Winifred Clara Goss. Born in Harlan County. Father Everett James Goss. Mother Clara Margaret Goss. He took a photograph of it with his phone. He said, I will follow this with the county today, before the deadline. She looked at him. She said, you drove through the night to bring this to me. He said, yes. She said, a man you do not know left you a task in a letter written 73 years ago, and you drove through the night to complete it. He said he was not a man I did not know. By the time I finished the 23 letters, I knew him fairly well. She held the bundle of letters against her chest again. She said, I have not read them yet. I am afraid to read them. He said, that is reasonable. She said, I am afraid that reading them will take something from me. The idea of them has been with me for 73 years. The idea of my father writing to me and keeping something for me. I am afraid the reality will be smaller than the idea. He said it will not be smaller. It is exactly what you need it to be. He wrote them for you. Every word of them is for you. She looked at him and something in her expression shifted, something that had been held in careful suspension for a very long time. She said, how do you know? He said, because I read them, and I am a stranger, and they still told me exactly what he meant me to know about who he was and what he was doing and why. If they did that for a stranger, I cannot imagine what they will do for the person he wrote them to. She held the letters. She said, will you come back? After you have done what you need to do with the county, will you come back and tell me what happens? He said yes. He stood. He picked up the document from the floor. He looked at her sitting in the chair by the window with the photographs in her lap and the bundle of letters against her chest, in the December light coming through the glass and catching the white of her hair. He said, your father did not fail you. None of them failed you. They each did what they could from where they stood, and they left the rest for someone else, and eventually there were enough of them that the thing got done. He had meant to say something simpler. But that was what came out, and it was true, and she received it in the way that true things are received when they arrive at exactly the right moment, which is with a stillness that is the opposite of emptiness. He left. He drove to Caulfield in 3 hours and went directly to the county clerk's office and filed the documentation before the deadline. The clerk, the same woman who had looked at him with calibrated helpfulness on his first visit, looked at the birth certificate in the summary document, in the filing form, and processed it with the efficiency of someone who has processed many such things and understands that the processing itself is a form of importance. Purcell called 40 minutes later. Bridger answered. Purcell said he understood that a competing claim had been filed. Bridger said yes. Purcell said the company would review the filing and determine whether to proceed. Bridger said the birth certificate is original and authenticated. The heir is living and competent and has been formally identified. Your claim has no standing. Review it as long as you want. The outcome will be the same. He ended the call. He drove back to Knoxville. Winifred was still in the chair by the window when he returned in the early evening. The photographs were on the table beside her, and the letters were there too. Several of them opened the pages held with the careful hands of someone reading something they cannot put down but must read slowly enough to honor. She looked up when he came in. She said the seventh letter. He said yes. She said he wrote down what they said to him on the porch that night. The specific words. He said yes. She said I never knew. I knew we left, and I knew it was because of men who wanted what was not theirs. But I never knew the specific words. He said, does it help knowing? She considered this seriously. She said yes, in the way that knowing the exact shape of a thing helps, even when the shape is ugly. An ugly exact shape is more manageable than an uncertain one. He said I filed the document. The claim is recorded. Your attorney can contact the county to confirm. She said I do not have an attorney. He said you will need one. For the estate matters. There may be a claim on the original land as well given the circumstances of the 1952 transfer. I cannot advise you on that, but you should have someone look at it. She said you are not going to help me with that. He said I am going to help you find someone who can. But the property matters are beyond what I can do for you, and I want to be honest about that. She said you are very direct. He said yes. She said Everett was direct. It was the first thing I noticed in the letters, even before the content. The quality of saying exactly what he meant. She looked at him. She said he was right about you. I know you will say that is not something you can judge. But he was right. He said he described the kind of person who would find the box, not the specific person. She said he described you. He did not argue with this. He stayed for another hour. They talked not extensively, but enough about the house in Caulfield and what he intended to do with it, and about Knoxville and how long she had lived there, and about Sable, whom she asked about with the specific interest of a woman who has lived long enough to understand the importance of the right company in difficult circumstances. When he stood to leave, she was holding the photograph of herself as a child on the porch. He looked at it. She said, I do not remember this day specifically, but I remember the porch. I remember the feel of the boards under my feet and the particular way the light came in the afternoons. I thought for a long time that the memories would fade. They have not. They have just become harder to place in time. He said the porch will be one of the first things I repair. She looked at him. He said when the house is in better condition, it should have someone in it who knew it when it was itself, if you ever wanted to see it. She held the photograph and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, I would like that. When it is ready. He said, I will let you know. He drove back to Caulfield through the December night with Sable in the back and the roads quiet and the stars very clear in the cold sky above the Cumberland Plateau. He was not thinking about Meridian Holdings or the legal process or the money in the box, which was Winifred's entirely, and would be delivered to her through whatever legal mechanism her eventual attorney established. He was not thinking about what came next in any practical sequence. He was thinking about the house, about the limestone walls and the tall windows and the wide porch that had once been the kind of porch that said something about the people inside it, about the work that was ahead of him, the structural work and the water and the windows and the long process of returning something to what it had been before time and abandonment had accumulated on it. He was thinking about what Everett had written in the last letter, about the particular piece of a place that asked nothing except that you respect what it is. He had come to Caulfield because he needed silence. He had found it. He had also found something he had not known he was looking for, which was a task that was exactly the size of what he had to give, neither too small to require his full attention, nor too large for one person to complete. He had found the particular satisfaction of a man who has done the thing that was in front of him and done it completely. He pulled through the gates of the Goss property and up the gravel drive and sat for a moment with the engine off, looking at the house in the headlights. He thought about what it would take to repair the porch. He thought it would take considerable effort and the right materials and the specific patience of someone willing to do the work correctly rather than quickly. Someone who understood that the difference between the two was not a matter of time, but of intention. He got out of the truck. Sable came out after him and stood beside him in the cold dark, both of them looking at the house. The windows were dark. The porch railing was broken in 3 places he could see from here. The limestone walls were intact, which mattered more than the porch railing. The foundation of the thing was sound. That was what you needed in the end. The foundation sound. The rest could be rebuilt. He put his hand on Sable's back, and the dog stood steady beneath it, warmed through the winter coat present in the way he was always present, which was completely and without reservation and without requiring anything from the completeness, except that it be recognized. He said quietly to the house or to the man who had built it, or to no one at all, "I will take care of it." He meant the house. He meant it in the specific sense of the repairs and the work ahead. But he also meant it in the larger sense that Everett had intended, the sense in which taking care of a thing means understanding what it is and what it requires, and giving it that steadily and over time without the expectation that the giving will be witnessed or recorded or repaid. The house stood in the dark with its intact foundation and its damaged porch and its intact limestone walls and its windows that had been closed for 73 years. And it was quiet the way it had been quiet since Bridger arrived. That specific quality of stillness that was not emptiness, but patience, the patience of something that has been waiting for the right person and has finally stopped waiting. He went inside. The fire in the study had gone to coals, and he built it back up and sat in the chair, and Sable lay at his feet, and the house settled around them with the small sounds of a structure that is inhabited again after a long time, the sounds of something returning to its purpose. He did not think about the past 2 years. He did not think about the apartment in Nashville, or the consulting work, or the long feeling of being the wrong shape for the space he was occupying. Those things were true, and they had happened, and they would remain true and happened. But they were not the territory he was in now. He was in the territory of what came next, and what came next was the work, the long, physical, specific work of returning a house to itself. And beyond that, the other work, the kind that had no blueprints and no measurements, the work of building something in a place that had earned its quiet and deserved to have something good happen inside it. He thought about Winifred coming in the spring when the porch was repaired, standing where she had stood at 9 years old in the black and white photograph, feeling the boards under her feet. He thought, that is something worth building toward. He put another piece of wood on the fire. Outside, the December night held its cold, and the stars held their positions, and the house held its ground, the way it had always held its ground through everything that had been asked of it and everything that was coming solid in its limestone bones, waiting for the mornings, the way it had always waited with the particular patience of something built to last.